York. Unique New York.
Yeah, I was one of the ones that Ashley had us do.
Oh, I just know me. Anyway, welcome to our first episode, Celluloid Chronicles, a historical movie podcast. Our main deal is that we'll be looking at historically set movies. We're going to be looking at the history and discussing what they got right or wrong, discussing the context of the time, just seeing what the movie covered and what it missed out on. Just kind of our interpretation of it and, going through the scenes and going through things that really struck us as modern individuals looking back on these historical times. I am Birdy, and I'm a crafter, writer, and elder millennial, and my co-host is...
My name is Brick. I am a knitter, reader, and movie junkie, and I love horror movies and historical movies, so Birdy and I have spent a lot of time discussing both.
Yeah, and definitely some of our movies will be horror movies, but they're also historically set. So we're actually really excited about those.
We're not going to focus on any one timeline, any one, place in history. It's going to be anywhere from the earliest set movie we would enjoy to really anything that's not set in today.
I feel like as we go through these movies, we keep finding things to talk about that are so relevant to our today times.
Yes, and we're going to cover everything: comedies, horrors, science fiction, fantasy, anything that really catches our eye for being in a different setting.
Yep, because there's a lot of crossover in some of those movies. You say science fiction and fantasy, but it's like there's going to be those grounded moments. Like I'm thinking Pan's Labyrinth.
Oh my God, yes.
That is technically fantasy, but it's set on the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War, I believe. And, that's still very relevant history. Yeah. So today though, for our first episode, we went big or went home, and we went big with The Other Boleyn Girl. We're going to start at the top with some trigger warnings, of course. This will involve executions, child loss, and unfortunately, rape. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
So those are the main kind of things to watch out for if you're sensitive to those topics.
We have a lot to say about the sexual assault.
Yes. So I'm going to let Brick take it from the top and tell us about this movie.
The Other Boleyn Girl was released on February 14th of 2008. It was based on the book of the same name by Phillipa Gregory, which was released in 2001. It was about $35 million to make, which you can see in the choice of big name actors and the costume pieces, not necessarily historically accurate, but beautiful costumes. Their settings, they filmed in different areas throughout England, like Kent and I forget the name of the other castle, Kimbolton Castle.
Yeah, they didn't necessarily film at Hever Castle, which is historically the Boleyn estate.
Right. I don't think it was available to them.
Yeah, it wasn't available. It's also a smaller, technically a smaller castle.
Right.
So it's more difficult for film production, is what I've heard.
So I guess we'll just go ahead and dive in.
Yeah.
We open with the Boleyn family as the children are young. The parents are watching their children play in a field, discussing that the father has received an offer of marriage for their youngest daughter, Mary. For their oldest daughter, Anne. And he explains to the mother that he's turned them down and offered Mary instead. You get the sense that he thinks that Anne can do better. Actually, he says Anne can do better. So you kind of get the idea that Anne's already valued more than Mary. They expect more of her and for her. We get some very gloomy opening titles, which after the opening titles, we start off at Mary's wedding. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. We see that Catherine of Aragon has had a stillborn son. The doctor informs the king, who seems very angry and bitter already, which I think is a disservice because in the book he was still very much the, golden prince, happy, loving person. But anyways, we see in the background the Duke of Norfolk, who has overheard this, and he takes off. He's gonna go plot. Then we see Mary. She is wedding William Carey, a courtier and cousin of some distance to the king.
Something like that.
They're discussing, she says how she's only ever wished for a man who is going to love her, and he promises that she's found the right man, but that's not quite true.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. So I'll dive into a little bit of the history at this point. So right off the top, Mary was actually the eldest by any accounts of the historical record. Back then, the dates for daughters, especially of not noble-born folk, they weren't really recorded very well, but by all accounts, Mary was likely born in 1499 or 1500, and Anne was born in anywhere between 1501 and 1507, likely 1501. No one really knows. And Anne was likely in her mid to late 20s when she even met Henry. Some of the interesting things, like accounts of this time, and especially of the Boleyn children. So there's Mary, Anne, and George. George is likely the youngest. And Thomas Boleyn was actually a very ambitious man. Like in this movie, you'll see that they've made him out to be kind of this also passive, kind of naive or foolish man that just goes with whatever his brother-in-law, the Duke of Norfolk, is saying. And Elizabeth Boleyn, the mother, is just like, well, I have to go along with it, but I don't like it. And that's kind of their whole role for the movie. But Tom Boleyn was actually an ambitious man, and he was actually a bit of an intellectual, and both him and Elizabeth pushed to have their daughters and son, obviously, actually very educated for the time. During this period, noble and wealthier women children, or girl children, were more likely to be educated during this time. We'll find later that changes into the 1600s. At this time, that was actually kind of the thing. It was a show of luxury that you were able to be educated. Thomas Boleyn actually had quite a career before any of these affairs or, these associations with Henry VIII and his daughters even came about. So a little more background on where we're at, because Rick touched on the fact that Catherine of Aragon had a stillborn son. She's had several miscarriages up to this point. We don't know why she had so many miscarriages, but it was very common for the time. As most people know, probably listening to this, infant mortality rate, maternal death rates were very high, especially for children. It was like some 50% at the time. Every 1 in 3 child was not likely to make it to 10 years old. So at this time, Catherine of Aragon was 5 years older than Henry. Only 5 years older than Henry. I want to point out that a lot of these movies that cover Henry VIII and the Tudor dynasty, they always make Henry look like early 30s, late 20s, and they always make Catherine of Aragon look late 40s or something.
Well, like the Tudors does it.
Yeah.
Really, really obnoxiously. He looks like in the very first episodes, he looks like he's maybe 20,
right?
And she looks like she's 40.
Obviously, most of us know the story that she was a Spanish princess that came to marry Prince Arthur, Henry's older brother, who died very shortly after they were married. And then eventually, due to political reasons, she ended up marrying Henry. Diving in a little bit more, Henry VII was obviously Henry VIII's father, and Henry VIII was born in 1491. He didn't expect to be king. He thought Arthur would make it. And this is probably why we know so little about his youth. According to a book I read a while back called The Four Princes, Henry VIII, Francis I, Charles V, and Suleiman the Magnificent, they talk about Henry a lot as being kind of the definitely the second son. You know, we see this parallel now between like Prince William and Prince Harry. Nowadays, Princess Diana's children, Elizabeth's heirs, well, now Charles III's heirs, all these connections. He was left to his own devices. All that was left to him is the mildly ridiculous catalogue of titles, which were almost immediately bestowed on him. Constable of Dover Castle, Warden of the Cinque Ports, all before his second birthday. He was Earl Marshal of England before his third birthday, Lieutenant of Ireland before his fourth. In 1494, still age 3, he was admitted to the Order of the Bath by his father, who commanded the Duke of Buckingham to attach a spur to his right heel before dubbing him. The next day, he was proclaimed Duke of York. A month later, Warden of the Scottish Marches. And in 1495, he received the Garter. Despite these distinctions, he enjoyed no real prominence until 1501, when he headed the procession which escorted his brother's young bride, the Princess Catherine, daughter of King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella. Yes, that Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of, Columbus fame, to St. Paul's for her marriage. It was only when Arthur died, he died of consumption in 1502 at the age of 15, leaving young Catherine a widow, that Henry found himself heir to the throne. So it was the next year that they were betrothed. Catherine was 17 and he was still 12, or nearly 12, excuse me. And this was in 1506, after the granting of a special papal dispensation. This will come back to haunt us. That was the dispensation because that allowed Henry to marry his brother's widow, because technically, after marriage, Catherine became his sister. And this is the part that comes back to haunt both of them when he gets a stick up his butt. Henry VII died in 1509. So that is when Henry VIII took the throne. Thanks to his father, he inherited a throne that was more secure than ever. And which is saying something, because what I find fascinating about these movies, sections of history, we talk about the Anarchy, War of the Roses, the Reformation. We talk about the Tudor dynasty, all like these separate things that are siloed from each other. But really, they're all connected. And one of the most fascinating things about what happened in Henry VIII's reign is that it all stems from needing this heir, the idea of having an heir, the idea of having a dynasty, and that all came because Henry VII left a very stable kingdom, but that's because he started as a kind of a usurper. So by having a daughter, this also harkens back to Henry VII's deep ancestor, just from the Anarchy, which was, some people might know, heard of Empress Matilda. Henry II, who was the son of Matilda, who was daughter of Henry I, who was the son of William the Conqueror. Like William the Conqueror, Henry I fully appreciated the throne because he had won it rather than simply inheriting it. And so, there's a lot of parallels here to Henry VII. But like his namesake grandfather, the younger Henry had spent his early years watching relatives fight for the crown. His mother failed to overcome her cousin King Stephen. She and his father had contested the king hard enough to pave the way for their eldest son to win the crown in the end. Henry II would father 8 children, 5 of whom became kings or queens. So there's this idea that Matilda, before the Tudor dynasty, there hadn't been a successful queen of England, I think, as a ruler. And she was an empress because she had previously married the Holy Roman Emperor. That's a whole other story. So she was known as Empress Matilda. And so there's this whole idea of the last time a woman ruled, what did that do?
It didn't go so well.
It didn't go so well. So there's that also thinking for Henry VIII, and thinking about his daughter. Not that she necessarily couldn't rule, but that the last time a woman had ruled, there was a lot of pushback from the nobility, pushback from the country. Oh, those women, they don't know nothing, so there's that. So then that cascades down to through the centuries. I want to say this was 1100s or 1200s was when the anarchy happened. So Henry II's Plantagenet bloodline would, after the reigns of his sons Richard the Lionheart, King John, they split it off into different tributaries. And the broader house of Plantagenet would rule the throne of England from Henry II's succession in 1154. Okay, so it was the early 1100s that the anarchy happened until Richard III's slaying by the Tudors in 1485, which is during the War of the Roses, which I know a lot of us have heard. So if you think in context, we think of the War of the Roses as happening like that's really medieval, and we think of the Tudors as like late Renaissance, very early modern, but really that was only, 1485, and we're talking 1509 to 1520s. It's like less than 50 years.
Yeah, there would still have been subjects and courtiers who had
War of the Roses.
Yes, had memories of Richard III, or possibly even Edward,
and the battles and the strife over it, and the country wanted and needed that security that Henry VII gave them, that Henry VIII as a son could give them. So you can kind of look at that and gain the perspective of where we're finding the context in this time period and why having a son and heir was such a huge deal during this time.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Henry would have grown up being told these stories from the people that remembered and had, firsthand knowledge and memories of the battles, the last battles, and Richard III, and all the things that his mother went through, and the way his father had to fight to gain the throne. So he would have grown up hearing these just absolutely horrible stories of how a country can descend into civil war, and that was a big fear for him, that if he did not leave a son, that could all boil up again.
It's kind of how we live still to this day with the aftermath of World War II, with the Cold War from the 80s. We didn't quite see that, but we heard from our families, and the riots and the civil unrest of the 60s and all these movements and everything. We still live with all that. I know my mom, who grew up through the 60s and 70s, she definitely imparted a lot of those fears of a country in unrest. This is the context we find ourselves in for the Other Boleyn Girl. As I just pointed out, to sum up, we got the anarchy, but we got the War of the Roses, and we have finally a secure dynasty that was left to Henry VIII by his father Henry VII. He took over from his brother, who has passed, and now we are trying to get an heir to continue this dynasty, to continue the security. And again, misogyny is still in there, but that is where we find ourselves in about early 1520s, where he's been married for about 10 years to, well, now even longer, Catherine of Aragon, who is not that much older than him. We have the Boleyns, who have been a part of the court for a while now. The Boleyns are a married-in branch to the Howard family. They'll come back later. So we got the Duke of Norfolk, who's the brother-in-law to Thomas Boleyn. Elizabeth Boleyn is the sister of Thomas Howard the third. He's the Duke of Norfolk. So we have already this connection between the Howard family, who's a very prominent aristocratic family, and Elizabeth Boleyn has married into this kind of merchanty, lower family. So Thomas was the son of Sir Thomas Howard, later second Duke of Norfolk by his first wife, Elizabeth Tilney. In 1483, his father and grandfather were created Earl of Surrey and Duke of Norfolk, respectively, in reward for their loyalty to the Duke of Gloucester, who became King Richard III after usurping the throne from his nephews, the children in the Tower, as you might remember them. In 1485, the Howards fought on the side of Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth, where the first Duke lost his life and the Earl of Surrey was badly wounded. As the battle resulted in the accession of Henry VII, Tudor, the Howards' loyalty to the losing side resulted in the forfeiture of their titles and most of their properties. Nevertheless, they soon began to be rehabilitated, and in 1489, Thomas's father was restored as Earl of Surrey. So also at this time, the Howard family was really, really pushing to rehabilitate themselves, get them back into good graces. So we have the third Duke of Norfolk, which is Thomas Boleyn's brother-in-law, who is going to be a real main character in this story, and not in a good way.
No.
And all accounts say he was a pretty despicable man. So they did not get this characterization wrong. I feel like I've set the scene here. I've just spent the last, 20 minutes talking about this. Come back and go, bring it back. Lady Mary Boleyn just got married to Sir William Carey. Henry was probably at the wedding.
In reality,
Henry was probably at the wedding. And she really did marry Sir William Carey, and we're going to find ourselves now. Enter Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk.
So Norfolk arrives at the Boleyn residence and begins telling Thomas Boleyn and Mary's father that the Queen has just delivered a stillborn son. The King and Queen do not have a good relationship at this point, so it's very unlikely that any more children are going to follow. But regardless, since he's not having a relationship with his wife, Norfolk thinks it's a good idea to introduce a Howard girl to become his mistress, somebody that can help bring influence and favors and pensions and grants and all, the good things that, can come from the king, bring all this favor to the Howard family. Thomas offers up his daughter, Anne, and Norfolk does cover, is this what you want for her? Because she's unmarried, but Thomas thinks that she'd be up to it. We also see Anne preparing Mary for her wedding night, telling her, that she wished she could be a better sister. She wished she could have been a better sister to tell her what to expect, how it was going to be.
She's older.
Yes, because she's supposed to be older. She's supposed to be the big sister. I helped you through this. If I had to talk to my older sister about sex, I would die. The movie kind of makes it look as though they had this loving sisterly relationship. They were not just sisters, they were friends. But just as an aside, in the book, it was not like that. Mary did love her. In the book, Mary loved her. You never really get the sense if Anne actually loved Mary or not. Theirs was more of a relationship of survival. This is, somebody I can trust because we have the same interests. Our family interests. We can trust each other as far as that. Other than that, the only person Anne ever really seemed to love was their brother George, but whatever. So the movie sets it up as, this loving relationship, and Anne drops her off at the marital suite, and then she goes to discuss with her father and uncle, we have something to tell you. They lay out the idea of becoming the king's mistress, and at first she's offended, because of course she would be. At this point in time, you need to stay a virgin, marry respectfully, and now you're telling me to go and be a mistress before I've ever even contracted a marriage. But the uncle points out that not only is this going to bring favors to the family, it will also help her in the long run. She'll be married off very well, and she begins to consider this.
She's convinced very quickly.
Very quickly.
In the movie.
Yes.
I don't even think she left the room before they said, you'll marry very well, and she was like,
it'll be a duke or marquess or a duke at least. And then you see,
if that's the case.
Yeah, you can see it in her face, like, okay, I can get down with that. All right. And I do want to point out just real quick the family in the book. So in the movie, we see that the uncle is absolutely all for this, gung-ho, throw her in the lion's den. The father is nervous, but he's up for it. And the mom just is absolutely against this idea, but she has no power. There's nothing she can do. In the book, the parents are just as bad as the uncle. They truly do not seem to really care about their children as beyond, how can they advance us? How can they benefit us in some way? So I had read something saying that the mom in the book in the movie seemed very cold and distant. It's like, well, if you compare her to the mom in the book, she's a good catch as far as moms go.
And I can add about the history, like this is all seemingly fictitious. So this whole scene of this, like, being an intentional setup for Anne or even Mary, this likely did not happen. The affairs were likely more organic and probably pursued specifically by Henry VIII.
We can't rule it out. But it's the same way you can't rule out that there's not an alien civilization living in the center of Mars because we can't see it,
Yeah, like, maybe
probably not.
There probably was definitely ambition in the Boleyn family. When they realized there was opportunities that were happening, they probably took them on.
I'm sure.
Was there a whole, like, let's do this mafia style backroom talk about let's set up the king to meet our daughters? No, it's not likely. There's no evidence. There's no letters. Again, could the Duke of Norfolk wanted this? Maybe. He probably liked it when it happened.
I'm sure.
But I doubt there was this whole, and the historians agree, there's no evidence for this being an actual setup.
Right.
Especially with Anne at the time. So I'll leave that.
Yeah. And let's be honest, the king, he was intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
He would have been on the lookout for people trying to use him and take advantage, because that would be his daily existence, honestly.
Yeah, King Henry VIII, from all we know, was actually very intelligent, very smart, very forward thinking in some ways. Like,
he was no slouch.
He was no slouch, especially in his early days. For all he became, he started out, there are legit reasons why he was called the Golden Prince during this time.
We see that Anne has accepted this. She's told Mary about it. This is what she's going to do. She's going to, try this. Let's see what comes of it. We see the king arriving to the Boleyn residence. He's coming for a hunting party. Always struck me that it's a very small party, considering, you're removing a royal person. But in modern times, you see, that's a lot of people. But anyways, they arrive and there's this scene. He meets Anne and he's instantly smitten. She's beautiful and she's supposed to be charming, but she doesn't really say anything, so I can't see, whatever.
No, the direction for Natalie Portman, who's playing Anne in this whole scene, in this movie, they did not utilize her talents whatsoever. If we're going to talk about the movie itself, it's like the direction on some of this, like, it's a good movie, but also, like,
but you had Natalie Portman who can can act with her eyes.
Yeah, and she just looks like this coquettish, simpering little...
Yeah, it's like, y'all really did a disservice to her on this.
God. I mean, they didn't do much better for Scarlet Johansson, who plays Mary. I mean, the amount of great talent they had in this movie that was underutilized or just absurd was...
Well, and like in the scene when they're having this feast, this dinner, and Anne is seated next to the king, which would be this huge honor that I just don't see happening at that point.
Very unlikely.
To take it as they're flirting and, he's gonna fall for her. She's just staring at him. Again, she can act with her eyes, so she does look very flirtatious, but the real Anne and even the book Anne is very witty and charming and intelligent. She always had something to say, a comment, a witty comeback, whatever. So she would not have just been sitting there staring at him.
All things, as I'll get into shortly, Anne Boleyn was very well educated, very smart, very
expressive.
Thank you. She was surrounded by wonderful individuals and intelligent individuals who allowed her to be very forthcoming, very forthright, and assertive. So, if anything, Anne was very assertive, which also comes back to haunt her later.
Yeah. Well, and history even tells us that she was not conventionally beautiful at that time,
right.
But her charm was in her conversation and her intelligence and all these ways that she just drew people in.
Yeah, she commanded her own presence, and everyone noticed. So.
And she was a bit of a fashionista, I found out.
Oh, yeah.
She set all kinds of trends even before she became Henry's, go-to to be queen. Even before then, she was setting fashion trends.
Yeah, again, she was traveled at this point. Like, honestly, at this point, spoilers, this whole scene did not happen. This whole event did not happen. She was literally, I think, in France at this time, which, just lends to that she was well traveled. She was in Burgundia. She was in France. She was in a few different courts by this point, and
by demand.
Well, again, I'll get there very shortly, but yeah. So this whole scene with her like being this simpering little doe-eyed girl,
that's
I
not
guess.
our Anne.
No,
that's not our Anne. So they go hunting. And again, as Birdy has pointed out, this did not happen. She was not here. The king did have a hunting accident. It was not here. It was not now. We find out that Anne and the king had continued chasing a deer after everybody else had given up. Anne, who knew the terrain, went over a ravine, but the king, who did not know the terrain, ended up falling and being injured. And we see, Anne's upset and Mary's comforting her. Thomas Boleyn is absolutely freaking out, and Norfolk, cold and calculated, he sees and he's bring Mary to me. So then he decides to send Mary in to tend to the king, which again, Birdy can tell you would not happen.
Absolutely.
He would have his own
physician.
Yes.
Nurse.
Yes.
Entourage.
Yes. It would not be her, and she sure as shit would not be in the room alone with him.
No.
I know in a deleted scene, like you see like a quick little nod from somebody in the corner, but whatever. In this, it's implied that they're in there alone together. The king, who has at this point been unconscious for hours, wakes up and immediately starts flirting. So I work in a medical setting in a non-medical role. And I just want to say, if you or a loved one, if you hit your head, if you lose consciousness for any reason, head injury, or you just pass out, whatever it is, seek medical attention. If you lose consciousness for hours, get to the hospital the minute you wake up. I beg of you, please, okay? And movies make it seem like it's this thing that you're just gonna wake up and bounce back from. That is not true. That little tangent over. So he wakes up and immediately starts hitting on Mary. And she explains, she's newly married and she has convinced her husband to stay in the country because she wants to start their life together, start a family. She just wants it to be a nice, quiet setting for them to begin their life. He ignores all of this because she's hot and gets her father to agree to bring her to court. So after the king has left, we see Mary is being voluntold that she is going to court because the king wants her. She's arguing with her father. She's begging her husband. She begs her mother, who tells her it's not a request. They have been commanded. She tells Anne she didn't want any of this, but Anne now thinks that she's thrown herself in the king's path and she's taken, the role that she was supposed to have. So Anne's already jealous. And they kind of present this as, this is going to drive a wedge between these two close sisters.
So this will start leading into stuff that happens actually at court, but backtrack a little bit. Yeah, the king didn't even go to Hever Castle, which is the seat of the Boleyn family, until after he was already courting Anne. As we're talking about Mary meeting Henry in his sickbed, which absolutely would not happen because part of that entourage would be a physician and probably like physician's attendants at that time. Like he would have been well taken care of if he had been injured. Daughter of his host would not be attending to him, let alone, regardless of his own physicians, the household would probably call for their physician. Mary would not be in there with patting his head with some like he's a Civil War soldier on the Union side being taken care of by some Southern belle on a plantation.
And honestly, if they were in a real sticky wicket and somebody in the family, it would be the mom. The mom would be
the mother would probably, it would not be the daughter. But I also wanted to point out the good line when they did go on this little hunting outing.
Oh, yes.
That
Natalie Portman.
Yeah, Natalie Portman got to make.
Yes. So we're pretending that the king's never seen a women's saddle. Yeah, the side saddle. He said, well, if you have no attendant to hold on to, and she goes, oh, well, there's a new saddle, check this shit out. He says, well, with no one to hold on to, how do you propose to stay under your horse?
And she goes, as you do, your grace, with my thighs. Like, I just love that line. Like, I mean, yeah, the full seduction, but it's just such a good line. So talking about Henry VIII getting injured, the poor guy, as the Golden Prince, there's a lot of theories about why he went off the rocker later in his life and became like a despot and angry individual. It was not syphilis, like a lot of the myths tell you. It's very unlikely not syphilis. He did suffer a lot of injuries. So most notably from jousting accidents, which led to persistent leg ulcers and potential psychological impacts from those injuries, because he did get hit in the head a lot. And we do
know that he suffered from headaches and migraines, which...
Yes.
But yes, Birdy and I are both true crime fans as well, and anybody else who listening is a true crime fan. Head injuries, repeated head injuries, can be a indicator or reason for serial killers.
Yeah, for going a bit...
people who become violent or...
losing that frontal lobe function.
Yeah.
He got a lot of these from jousting accidents. The most significant was in 1536, which actually was like right before, everything went south for Anne, as we know. He fell from his horse, which resulted in a prolonged unconsciousness and a serious leg wounds that ulcerated and refused to heal. Other injuries included a leg wound from a lance splinter. The subsequent pain and limitations caused by all these injuries probably led to his personality changes and more tyrannical behavior. He did suffer a blow to the head in 1524 during a joust, likely due to a visor failure or him forgetting to put his visor down. And that's according to Smithsonian Magazine. And obviously the lack of modern medicine and understanding of wound care in the 16th century made managing these ulcers and injuries challenging, to say the least. So I wanted to bring some of that up.
So we see Mary and Anne meet Queen Catherine.
Yes.
And she has a much, much larger role in the book. I absolutely adore Catherine in the book and in her own book, The Constant Princess, also by Phillipa Gregory. Even historically, we know that as much shit as Henry put her through, she always was composed. She always was kind and polite. She was always the perfect princess, the perfect queen. There was only one time we know of that was recorded that she even said anything remotely catty to Anne.
As a little aside on Queen Catherine, because I'm not sure where to put this in, but so as I mentioned earlier, she was the daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand, who, started a lot of the... Didn't they do the Spanish Inquisition? I think they did the Spanish Inquisition, and they sent Christopher Columbus on his little voyage that destroyed the New World. So they were big icons of the late 15th century into the 16th century. And she was 3 years old when she was betrothed to Arthur, then the Prince of Wales and the older brother of Henry VIII. And they married in 1501, but Arthur died 5 months later. So Catherine spent many years in limbo, living in England, because nobody knew quite what to do with her, but they didn't want to take her off the board as the pawn, as a woman she was at the time. And I think, what's the new show? The Spanish Princess. Is it the Spanish Princess?
Yeah, that came out, I'm not sure exactly when.
Recent, semi-recent.
Yeah, there's 2 seasons, and that's supposed to be based off The Constant Princess, but they change a lot of stuff up.
Oh, did you watch it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But I bring that up because covers a good chunk of time when she spends this limbo time after Arthur dies, but before she marries.
Yeah. And if you are interested in that, if you are interested in historical fiction, again, The Constant Princess by Phillipa Gregory, it covers from just before she marries Arthur to, goes over their marriage, the limbo, also her early marriage to Henry, all the way up to the Battle of Flodden. So it covers a nice significant chunk of time.
Yeah, so speaking of that, so during this time, she actually held a position of ambassador of the Aragonese, which was her father's technical kingdom in Spain. The Aragonese crown to England in 1507. She was the first known female ambassador in European history, which I didn't know till I read that. And then she married Henry in 1509. And then for 6 months in 1513, she served as regent of England while Henry was in France. And during that time, the English defeated a Scottish invasion at the Battle of Flodden, which Rick mentioned. During that time, she played as the regent and made it actually an emotional speech about courage and patriotism to her people, which I absolutely had to look up and read at some point. Then, of course, in 1526 was when Henry started his affair with Anne Boleyn, but she had hoped Mary would take over as heir presumptive. But you can see with some of that little nugget of Catherine's history that we have a very strong woman on our hands, and she was an amazing human being, especially as the daughter of such a major monarchy in Spain.
Well, and Isabella, even though she was married to Ferdinand, she was Queen of Castile in her own right.
Yes.
And he, by decree of her council and her subjects, he had very little say, very little influence. She was queen in her own right.
It was basically a co-monarchy, which we don't understand.
It was kind of a perspective. Yeah, it was kind of like a protection, so like somebody couldn't come and usurp her because, you have a king, you have a man, you're okay.
Spain wasn't technically fully united at that point, I believe. Like I said,
it was a different kingdom, but really her mother was her own mistress. She ruled her own country really as a sole monarch. She grew up seeing strong, powerful women.
Yep. And the same with Anne, which we'll come to find out very shortly. I know I keep alluding to that, foreshadowing. I'm going to do a little deep dive on the reality of the timeline for Anne and Mary Boleyn. We'll get to that. So now we find ourselves at court.
Mm-hmm. We have a quick little conversation. William Stafford. Okay. We see William Stafford, who had been employed at the Boleyn's household, which he would not have known them at this time. He was employed through her uncle Norfolk, and this was later on, but at this point in the movie, he is employed with the Boleyns, and he and Mary are discussing how, they miss the country. They're not built for the court. So, that's a little foreshadowing to like, oh, they must be soulmates. The queen tells her that he's going to see her tonight. So we get kind of a reprisal of Anne preparing her for this first night. But this time she's kind of catty. She's a little jealous, and she tells, try to please him if you can. Just being a bitch. When she arrives to the king's bedroom, he offers to get her something. And so we see in one of the very few moments that really does kind of humanize Henry in this movie, he's telling Mary how he understands how she feels as a second daughter because he was a second son, and he understands what it was like, all of the praise and compliments are for somebody else. So he understands how that feels, and she instantly falls in love and has sex. Anyways, that happens. The next morning, she is taken by Stafford to go see her family, and she's telling her uncle, her father, and her mother, and her husband how it went with the king. That yes, we slept together. Yes, he had me more than once. Yes, he was pleased.
And humiliating question.
Yes, that an embarrassing thing to ask in front of any of them, but I mean, that would have just been painful, whether you were in love with your husband or not. That had to be a painful thing to try to talk about in front of your husband. And she's dismissed, and Norfolk is, just absolutely delighted, over the moon. This is perfect. We're going to move forward with this. And he's pointing out she needs to be clean. She needs to be educated. She needs to do this and that and da-da-da-da-da. And Elizabeth Boleyn points out that she is already these things because she brought her up that way. She made sure she was educated. She made sure she knows her manners and hygiene. She knows all this already. I had pointed this out once before. Birdy and I really like that she has a line of, And for what? So she may be traded for the amusement and advancement of men. It's kind of a heartbreaking line, I think, but also at that time, that's what it was.
Yeah, women were commodities at that time. Like, I mean, there was definitely more than that, and we're oversimplifying it a little bit, but from our modern perspective,
you married for the advancement of your family.
Yeah, back then you married for the advancement of your family, and you didn't really have a lot of options. I mean, look at how we just went over how hard it was to for a princess, a daughter of a king, to even be considered an heir of a kingdom, let alone any other woman in that time of any noble family. Mm-hmm. Now, we could tell you hundreds of wonderful stories that I'm so glad we have in history of strong, beautiful, courageous women just doing the work. But we know that those stand out, and those were written about because they were technically rare.
Yes. We kind of get a montage of Mary and Henry in their affair, and we see Anne, who we've seen a couple times making eyes at Henry Percy, who was the son of the Earl of Northumberland. I think they became dukes at some time. At some point around. But you know, she's been making eyes at him at the wedding, and then when they first got to court. But we see they've run off to get married. They're married in secret. They consummate the marriage, and we see George. He's very excited. He runs in and he's telling Mary, you know, she's done it. She's married him. You know, isn't this, you know, he's excited. He thinks it's this wonderful thing. But Mary immediately is worried, you know, this is going to ruin her. She can't do this, and goes and tells their parents. So we see her father and her uncle berating them. You know, you had no right to do this. What were you thinking? The marriage of a senior noble that concerns the king. This all needs to be approved. Basically, he's already betrothed to somebody else.
It was not good.
Yeah.
Not done.
Yeah, it was not done. The uncle tells them, you know, he's going to go back to Northumberland, and this is going to be forgotten about. It'll be as if it never happened. And this dude who's had absolutely no lines just looks at her for a second and walks out of the room. I do like that in the book, he actually fights for her. He does try to fight for her, and he's kind of tricked into believing that she's given him up. So in the book, she was actually in love with him. They were basically torn apart in the book.
Yeah, and in this movie, it didn't even feel like they were in love, were they? It really felt like a weird infatuation.
Yeah, more lust than anything.
And Anne was just doing it to act out, basically.
Yeah, and even in history, like, we know that there was
a secret betrothal. So I'll cover that now. Yeah, so there was no actual secret marriage with Henry Percy. This was allegedly, there was a secret betrothal, but that was cut off by Henry Percy's father, the Earl of Northumberland. But there was no real scandal on it. It is true that senior nobles in Tudor England did require royal consent, or they at least had to consider it before marrying. They had to consider royal consent in it, because you are part of the court. Your marriages are more political than just love, as we all know. But as far as we know, there might have been a betrothal, but there was no secret marriage. And this actually happened, again, the timeline is quickly moving out of any reality at this point.
And any betrothal that they would have had would not have been legitimate because he was already betrothed. So like Birdy said, there was no scandal because there didn't happen.
It was overblown.
Yeah, it was very quickly. You're engaged? No, you're not. Go home.
This was a plot device. I'll just go ahead before even Rick gets there. But this is a plot device basically to send, as a punishment, Anne to Paris.
Yeah, send her to the French court as punishment. How dare you?
Learn manners.
What do I have to do to be sent to the French court in disgrace?
Please punish me by sending me overseas.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, that's that part. And I'll just point it out now as I move into the next part of what I'm going to discuss. The timeline is preposterous.
So ridiculous.
It started out okay, and then it's off the rails.
Yeah, and so just a quick thing. In the book, it covers the years 1521 to 1536. So we've got a nice long period to, settle down in.
This movie feels like it's covering 2 years or something. It's ridiculous. Maybe 3, just because there's pregnancies.
Right.
Was there anything you wanted to add before I do a little deep dive on Anne and Mary?
No.
All right. So I'm going to just take a little side tangent here in this timeline. I'm going to do a little deep dive on Anne Boleyn and Mary Boleyn. They were sisters. I already covered this. They were born to Thomas Boleyn and Elizabeth Boleyn. Elizabeth Boleyn being a part of the Howard family. Mary was most likely born first, and then followed by Anne, and then followed by George. From childhood, Anne was considered forward and precocious. She was definitely an extroverted individual as we'd understand them now. She was very elegant in how she purported herself and how she interacted with other people. Mary was considered more passive, more homely, more traditional Tudor woman, late medieval woman. We don't know much about their actual childhood, them running in fields, who knows. In 1513, Anne was specifically sent to the court of Margaret of Austria, who is the Archduchess at the time, where she held a kind of special court, which was considered kind of a foremost finishing school for ladies of the time. This is where she got her education, or part of it. It was a very big deal for any young woman to attend this. It was absolutely, at the time, the best opportunity for any noble or noble adjacent woman. And the Archduchess, she took to Anne. She really liked Anne. Again, it's that charm, that his history-changing charm that Anne Boleyn had. As for Mary Boleyn, she likely resented this opportunity that Anne received, and she was actually left behind at home. She did not go to the finishing school. However, in 1514, Mary received the opportunity to serve in the French court of Mary Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII. Mary Tudor at this time was marrying Louis XII, of France. Obviously, this was a diplomatic political marriage set up by Henry VII. However, in the long-running tragedy of husbands dying very shortly after marriages in this time frame, Louis XII died 3 months after marrying Mary Tudor. And then his brother, Francois I, took over. So this is Louis's brother. And in this new court, Anne Boleyn joined her sister, Mary Boleyn, in France. She obviously graduated from her finishing school. Anne loves the court life, and she loves verbally jousting and intellectualism, whereas Mary kind of just stays very homely and passive, and, she's part of court life, but, she doesn't take to it quite like Anne does. So now Francois I has taken a wife, Queen Claude, and she offers to send most of Mary Tudor's ladies back to England, but she specifically offers Anne Boleyn to stay in court as her lady in waiting. She liked these women, these major women loved Anne so much that they specifically gave her these long-term opportunities to serve in these courts. And I just want to point that out because that really talks about Anne's character and her forthrightness and her assertiveness and intellectualism. Mary Boleyn, I gotta be very specific here with all these Marys and Annes and everybody else. She does stay on, probably because, you can stay with your sister. So she does stay in court, but this is where Mary's life takes a little bit of a turn. So we don't know. This is all alleged. Mary was likely a conquest of Francois, who is and was known as a womanizer. And once this became a rumor, Mary kind of disappeared from the historical record at this point. It's speculated she was sent away from court life at this time, possibly to another French noble's estate, where she could learn life as a court lady and what that is expected. Again, the affair with Francois is not clear. We really don't know that this happened because of the way the records are and what's being said. It's possible.
Unfortunately, at that time, the rumor is all it took.
But then she did reemerge. She showed up again in the records in 1520, so we're getting real close to our major time area here. She emerged in 1520 at the court of Henry VIII, so at some point she left France, She went back to England, and that's when she married William Carey. Henry, according to historical record, did attend her wedding and may have become interested in her at that point, because it is believed, and kind of like we see in the movie, it's shortly after that it's allegedly he began an affair with her. It is possible that Mary was forced to become his mistress, but not because of her family. It is likely that Henry VIII himself could have manipulated the situation in such a way that she was obliged to take on that role.
Yes, and like we will see later that there is an assault scene. There is nothing in history to tell us that he violently assaulted women, that he raped women by force. To be perfectly clear, he was the king. He was the absolute head of the country. There is a huge power dynamic. If he wanted you, saying no, refusing him could have huge consequences, not for just you, but your family. Why would you take the risk of saying no when it could be to such detriment?
Yeah, and with the historical record, we do know that Henry had a pattern of seducing ladies who were already married. Like, he specifically picked women who were already married, because any children that resulted from those affairs could be claimed by the husband, and he didn't have to claim them. So he actually usually picked women who were married. We see that with Elizabeth Blunt. We know about Henry Fitzroy, is the only bastard son that he did claim. Elizabeth Blunt was married when they had the affair and when Henry Fitzroy was born. During that time, this was all part of the dichotomy of court life. Everyone was ruled by religious and chivalric morals. That's a whole other story. In reality, they were always overruled by ambition, youthful liaisons, and familial politics. So that is what we know leading up to Mary Boleyn's marriage. And we know that by 1522, relations broke down again between England and France, because they always did. Francois and Henry V. I recommend the book The Four Princes, which talks about Francois I, Henry VIII, the Ottoman Emperor, and the Holy Roman Emperor at that time. They were like huge. They were the big men pillars in this time. They were all at the same time. It blows your mind. Again, we're going to talk about context of history. We're talking about this little nebulous story in England, but all of this is connected to like a greater whole of what was going on at the time. Henry VIII was a contemporary of Francois I, Suleiman the Magnificent, and the Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was Catherine of Aragon's nephew, which was a major reason why Henry VIII had such trouble getting those papal dispensations. Yeah. So really interesting. But again, Francois and Henry, they had such a love-hate relationship.
It's like that coworker that you can get along with every now and then. You might have good days, but all in all, you hate that bitch.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely that. That was their whole relationship. So anyway, 1522, relations broke down between England and France, and Anne was called home. We're going to get to it. Anne did not come home to have an affair with Henry. Anne came home because war was happening.
Yeah.
But once she entered the court, she quickly outshone Mary again, because that was who Anne was. Mm-hmm. Although Mary was still likely the king's mistress, and maybe, sort of, but probably not, had a child with him, she was quickly overlooked. And I'll continue this story as we move further, because now we're moving further into the movie, but that was the reality of their lives leading up to, much more interesting than anything portrayed in this movie.
Yeah.
Because reality can be more fascinating.
I do really hope that Starz eventually does a miniseries like they did for The White Queen and White Princess, because it would be fantastic. They could cover so much. Mm-hmm. And I know they like doing the three, focusing on three women. They could absolutely focus on three women. They could focus on Mary and Anne and Jane Parker. They could choose somebody else, but it can be done. Get with it,
I mean,
stars,
look
please.
what they did with the Avengers. How many fucking characters were they covering? 6?
I gave up on
Yeah.
Marvel a long time ago. It was too much.
House of the House of Marvel. We now have full.
We're in full affair.
We're in full affair at this point.
So yes, Anne has been sent away. Mary and the king are continuing with their affair. We see, they're very lovey-dovey around the court. They're very open about their affair. And now the favors have started coming in. So we see that they have been given these royal apartments or apartments within the court anyway. And we find out from Elizabeth Boleyn that they belonged to the Duke of Buckingham before he was executed. She's just pointing out that royal favor comes and goes. But we see they've received these apartments, and George Boleyn has been betrothed to Lord Morley's daughter, Jane Parker, who he has no interest in. He does not want to marry this woman at all. But the father points out, do you want Mary to do everything? Basically, you need to do your part to advance this as well. You see that Mary is pregnant, and she wakes up one morning and she is bleeding, but she has not lost a child. But because she has had some vaginal bleeding during pregnancy, they immediately put her into confinement and into bed rest, basically. Norfolk is pointing out that, now that she can't flirt with the king and be with him, he's going to lose interest very quickly. Other nobles are going to be putting their daughters in his line of vision.
It was so stupid. They had that little scene where, Henry goes into the room, stares at her, scoffs, and walks away.
Right, what the fuck was that? Yeah.
Creepy. Anyways.
Yeah. Thomas suggests, why don't we bring Anne home? And Norfolk in the movie, he points out, she's only been there a couple months. What do you think a couple months in France will have made any difference? And it's all of 8 minutes screen time. I think less than 10 minutes screen time. So she's been in France for roughly 2 or 3 months at most, which, as Birdy just covered, not true. But we're expected to believe that she has come back from France with full knowledge of how to manipulate those around her and how to wrap men around her finger and all those little French charms.
French charms.
What was it they call it in the tutors? What French graces have you learned? I love that.
So I got some things on this. So Lady Boleyn talks about their apartments being part of the former Duke of Buckingham. So a little deep dive on this dude. I mentioned him previously about how he helped bring Henry VIII into Order of the Garter when he was a little princeling, barely 3 years old, and put spur on him and anything. So Duke of Buckingham. He was one of the few peers of the realm with a substantial Plantagenet blood. Stafford was descended from John of Gaunt through his different Stafford, not William Stafford, by the way, descended from John of Gaunt through his paternal grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, daughter of Edmund, 2nd Duke of Somerset. And this whole family maintained numerous connections, and often among his extended family with the rest of the upper aristocracy, activities which attracted Henry's suspicion. So because he still had connections to the Plantagenet line, hearkening back to the War of the Roses, there's still these suspicions of these other offshoot families. So, we know the Lancasters and the Yorks and blah, blah, blah. Well, this is kind of still keeps going after the war ended. They weren't all this giant happy aristocracy afterwards. So because he maintains these connections that Henry doesn't necessarily like as a tutor, during 1520, just as Mary was coming back to court, Buckingham became the suspect of potentially treasonous actions, and Henry authorized an investigation, ordering Cardinal Wolsey to watch him. The king personally examined witnesses against him, gathering enough evidence for a trial. The Duke was finally summoned to court in 1521 and was promptly arrested and placed in the Tower. And he was tried before a panel of 17 peers, being accused of listening to prophecies of the king's death and intending to kill the king. And then finally, Buckingham was executed on Tower Hill in May 17, 1521, by Act of Parliament in 1523, disinheriting his children from most of his wealth. So that's where we, those apartments probably became available.
We don't need them anymore.
So some historians think this is one of the few executions of high persons under Henry VIII, which the accused was almost certainly guilty. So, it's very likely that Buckingham was doing some shady shit here that even historians are like, yeah, he probably, he's one of the few, he was one of the few people Henry VIII killed that actually was probably guilty. And that's saying. Yeah. So Sir Thomas More, though, did complain that the key evidence was hearsay from servants who, as commoners, were threatened and tortured to extract false confession. There was this rule at the time that you cannot torture nobility, but you're fine to torture peasants and commoners.
Yeah, so we'd have been screwed.
Yeah, we all would have been absolutely tortured. So this actually comes back in Anne's trial with the men who were accused along with her. So
that they completely gloss over in the movie. They don't even acknowledge. They don't
even exist. We'll get back to that. Yeah. But I also want to talk about how Anne came back to England.
Oh, yeah.
Can we talk about this scene?
Go ahead.
It's just the cloak and dagger of it all. She's secretly boated to the shore. It's at night. You see off in the distance a little ship, I assume, crossing the channel, but you don't need that big of a ship to cross the channel. She's boated into shore. You just see this silhouette of her and these horses and just like one or two guys just helping her on shore. And then she gets on those horses and they're riding through the dark. And she's back in to get back to court, like she had to hide that she was coming back, and wow. Again, she was called back to court because France and England were likely going to war.
Yeah, there'd have been no secrecy about it.
Final note, not really important, but just the fact that they had to justify Mary Boleyn's lying in period. Like, yeah, that could happen where you have vaginal bleeding and you can go to have your lying in period early, but all women at that time had a lying in quote unquote period. There was a chunk of the pregnancy where you just laid in bed. That was the protocol at the time. They didn't really need to justify it with the vaginal bleeding, but probably to our modern sensibilities, they had to come up with a reason.
Yeah, so there's a reason that she's or that she's just going to be confined to this room. Yeah. Which, that was just standard fare for
and
nobility and upper crust society.
Because peasants, they had to still go in the fields.
You still had to work till the baby dropped out of you, and then you just kept going.
And then just keep going. Yes, there was kind of a rule that you couldn't have sex with your partner during this time because it could hurt the baby. Like, that was just their medical thought process at the time. And once they're both in court, Anne and Mary, that French influence that Anne had. And, Mary did get a little bit of it. She was there in reality. She spent that time there. She had the charisma and the education to shine at court. And as far as we know, this was only until 1526 when the affair between Mary and Henry probably ended. But I'll let Brick get back to that because, so now we have Mary in her lying in period and Anne is back at court.
Yes, and immediately catches the king's interest. This is one of the few scenes where we see that Anne is being, vivacious and lively and everybody is interested, and she catches the king's interest and he immediately becomes infatuated with her. So we see at one point Anne comes into the apartments and Theon Greyjoy is there. I forget his name.
Alfie
something.
It's Alfie.
Yeah, Alfie something.
Yeah, I was shocked when I saw him.
Sorry, Alfie. But yes, Theon Greyjoy is there, and he's brought a gift from the king, and she tells him to open it, and it's this beautiful, I think it's a brooch, this beautiful piece of jewelry. Anyways, she tells him to send it back. We next see Anne is in the lying-in chamber talking to Mary, I'm so sorry, and I love the little catty comment of, do you feel as terrible as you look? Women in France would never let themselves get in this position. Fuck you. But we see that Theon's back. He has tried to send another gift to Anne, and this time Mary sees the whole thing. Anne sends it away, and you see, I'm looking out for you. Just, beautiful moment of gaslighting. And of course, Mary sees through it. She's not tricked. She already knows. But everything's kind of moving very quickly. So Henry confronts Anne. He comes to the apartments and goes, right up to her room. He's at her door and basically, come out and date me, kind of a thing, why are you avoiding me? Anne's explaining that, we can never be together. You're married, you're with my sister, now you're discarding my sister. I could never put myself in that position. She's basically saying, I feel it too. I feel this passion too, but I have to restrain myself. So Henry is absolutely gung-ho and fired up at this point, thinking, she wants me to. We see Mary go into labor. As she is actively in labor, though, the king is called to the apartments. She's having your child. What's it going to be, a boy or a girl? Everybody's excited. Everybody's there. Henry sees Anne and immediately forget your sister who's bearing my child as we speak. Forget my wife who I've been married to for 20 years. 28 years. Yeah.
Years at this point, yeah.
I will be faithful to you alone. And she's still kind of playing cat and mouse. She's still kind of, stringing him along a little bit. Then it's announced Mary has had a boy. She sees his face. She sees he's immediately about to be drawn away. So she drops the yes. Yes, you may hope. Now he has to keep up with what he said. He's going to have nothing to do with Mary. We see him walking away, and Mary is heartbroken, holding their son. And the next scene is Uncle Norfolk just losing his shit because everything was perfect. Everything was lined up how we wanted. She just bore him a son. How could you do this? What are you thinking? And Anne tries to point out, well, the queen might bear him a son. Nope. Now he knows that Queen has now entered menopause. They don't call it that.
Yeah,
we know that.
Bleeding.
Yes, we know that she is no longer able to bear children at this point. So now you have royally fucked up. What is your plan? Well, Anne lets Mary know that she's being banished to the country. She and her child are to go to the country and have nothing to do with Henry, nothing to do with the court. You're gone.
First of all, Mary's first child was a girl.
Yeah.
Not a boy. Which I just found absolutely, I'm like, what a switch for the drama. She definitely had a girl. Henry never acknowledged the girl as his. We don't even know for sure. We're not even sure because the end of their affair was kind of nebulous. We're really not sure when that happened. We know it was over by 1526, but we don't know for sure when before that it happened. Mary did have 2 children, which historically a lot of people question if they were Henry's. Less likely, the boy that she did have later was not his. If either of them were his, it would have been the girl, her first child. But he did not acknowledge either of them.
A lot of people point out the fact that not so much her, but her daughter Lettice looked so much like Elizabeth.
Yeah, yes, there is talk that she does look related.
She does, absolutely. Which, I mean, either way, they were, at the very least, through Anne.
Yeah.
But one thing that I didn't know until recently, which surprised me that I had never looked up, yes, Carrie.
Yeah,
they were, he and the king were cousins of some kind, and they did have similar characteristics. So it's not that far-fetched that the daughter was still Harry's.
And they're all related. Every single one of them is related. Anyway, we'll get to that too. Fun facts section. So anyway, we don't know about these children. It's possible, but I did find it hilarious that they still wanted to say it was a boy and he would have walked away for Anne. He was so in love with Anne. If he had actually had a boy and really assumed, I mean, he did that. Like Henry Fitzroy, who was still alive at this point, I believe, from his mistress Elizabeth Blunt, was like the apple of his eye at this time because it was his only son. And
he bestowed all kinds of favors and titles. Basically, he had offices assigned to him as a toddler.
Yeah, if Henry Fitzroy had survived, sadly he died, I think around 15 or 17 of fucking smallpox or some kind of tuberculosis.
I know it was when he was married to Jane Seymour. That's the only thing I know about the time period.
Yeah, so it was very sad. But if he had lived, there's really likely that Henry, just given what he did in this situation, he probably would have made him somehow legal. Like, he probably would have made him his heir.
Yes.
If he had survived. Like,
he would have tried to work it.
Oh, yeah, he would have tried to work it. If Henry Fitzroy had survived, he likely would have taken the throne.
Yeah, so, he would have found a way to legitimize him.
Yeah. Or if Edward hadn't been born with Jane Seymour and Henry had survived, like, things would have been different.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's a sad footnote on history, is that Henry Fitzroy did die after making it all the way to 17, which is significant for a child in that time period. We know that Mary Boleyn, may have had a child, maybe by Henry, but during this time period, nebulously, they were still having an affair at this time. But by 1526, it was definitely over, as Anne and Henry were fully googling eyes at each other. Mary was always considered accommodating and sweet, like we said, but Henry always lost interest in his affairs until Anne Boleyn. So he became quite obsessed with Anne. Historical record really shows, like, this was full on almost stalking.
Yeah. And you can read
stalking. Yeah.
I think there's 7 letters that he wrote. And there's ones that specifically are in the Library of the Vatican because they had been stolen when he was trying to get the marriage annulled, and the whole breaking with the church, excommunication, all this shit was going on. So somebody stole these letters that Henry had written to Anne from Anne, and they're now in the Library at the Vatican.
Oh, wow.
But
the Vatican.
And he very, very rarely even wrote his own letters, but he wrote these himself. Like, he was that obsessed with her. One of the fun facts that I have for later, which I'll just go ahead now, the letter that we see Mary reading that is from Henry, the line that she is reading, that's from one of the letters that he had actually written, but it was actually to Anne.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought that was a cool little tidbit.
Yeah, we don't know the overlapping timeline between the affairs, but once he's with Anne, he's fully with her.
Yeah, I will say in the book they play it as that he's still having a sexual affair with Mary while he's falling in love with Anne. Okay. And the family, the parents in Norfolk, both think that this is the absolute perfect scenario because we have him on both fronts. Nobody else is going to catch his eye. I know. And like, there's this part where, they've decided, okay, we're backing Anne. We're going to fight for him to eventually choose Anne fully. But we want Mary to keep him busy in the bedroom so nobody else slips in there because Anne's going to be holding out and telling him no. They have this like family council going on and they're discussing it all. Anne tells Mary, but you have to be boring because basically I'm the interesting one. I'm the one that he's going to be having, these discussions. I'm the one that's going to keep him interested. You have to be boring. And she says something like, I don't know if I can do that. And Anne says, you underestimate yourself. You can be wonderfully boring. Oh my God. I love that line because it's such a catty bitch line. And again, that just goes to show like how little her family regards her. The only one in her family that gives her any kind of anything is George. George is the only one that seems to actually have any affection for poor Mary.
Yeah, it gets real weird. That's all very unlikely.
I do want to say real quick, because I know Birdy has history on this. There's a couple of quick scenes where Anne is talking to the king and trying to get him to understand, if you divorced your wife, if you annul the marriage, we can be married. If she's talking to her family, if he breaks with the Catholic Church, we can achieve this. And there is a lot of people still that think that Anne is the reason that he did all this. I guess ultimately that's why he went through with it. But these thoughts were already in process. They were already, before he met Anne, possibilities.
Yes, I have a whole section that I'll have to definitely shorten in the interest of time about the Reformation. This is a huge part of this story.
Hello to all my favorite history nerds. This is Birdy here to come in and let you know we've taken your feedback and decided to split this gigantic first episode into 2 parts. We apologize for the sudden cliffhanger, but do come back and listen to part 2 of our deep dive into the Other Boleyn Girl in the next episode. Thank you, and keep making history. Thank you for listening to Celluloid Chronicles, a historical movie podcast. Please like and subscribe to us wherever you listen, and we hope you join us again soon.
Oh.